Stuck. Little clitty litter get you out every time. Well, here's a new project. 79 Camaro. This belongs to the son of a guy I used to work road construction with. We go way back, had some good times together. But this is his son's car. She's got fresh paint. And she's getting a 5.3 and a TR6060 6-speed transmission out of a 5th gen Camaro. She's got no drivetrain in her. She's a little grimy in here, so before I even unload it off his trailer here, I'm gonna roll the steamer out here and clean this all up. So we've got a nice platform to start from here. Well, I gave this thing the old rattle can overhaul already, but I think we can do a little better than that. So we'll hit that with the old steamer too. That's looking a hell of a lot better. Sorry about the orange paint, fellas. Fellas being Mike and Shane. Little oven cleaner goes a long way. Them heads look like brand freaking new. Now we don't have to worry about dropping all that trash down the ports when we pull this intake off, because that truck unit is not going to fit in that car. TR6060 cleaned up really nice too. There's just water on it yet. That thing was grimy and nasty, and man, that looks like brand new now. I'm trying to figure out why this oil's got so much fuel in it. That'll do it. Yep, Whoa, what happened? Starting to feel like Henry Ford around here. You can get any color you want, as long as it's black. We decided this scheme would match the car a little bit better. And never mind that crusty alternator and power steering pump. We'll get those cleaned up and looking nice. Just got this stuff mocked up on here to verify that the truck water pump isn't going to work. I've got the throttle body flipped. With it the normal way, the throttle linkage hits the outlet on the pump there, and with it upside down and hits the IAC. This is the low pro model sheet metal intake. It's roughly 3.5 inch lower than a truck unit. That bracket lowers the alternator about the same amount, so we can maintain our hood clearance. Got the motor mount adapters on there. And this is the Summit flavor of Holley's 302-1 or 2 or one of them. But the owner of the car bought one of these GM Performance Parts muscle car pans, which is actually a H2 Hummer pan. And as you can see, there's little to no difference from the pickup pan by the time you get to the bottom here. Don't get suckered into buying one of these. In about any muscle car, they hang down about, yay far below the cross member. And for some reason, they rub on the ground. I've taken 3 of these pans off of different customers' cars and put the Holley pans on them for them. He also supplied me with these headers, and I'm really starting to feel bad for him here. It's more parts that really can't use. I got the plug threaded in there as far as it'll go by hand, and you throw the plug socket on, and we're like not even close to getting on there. You can see the angle of the socket to the plug, and them plugs are down in there pretty far, so there's no putting a wrench on that. And that's the good side. Over here we're looking way worse. Like no way in hell you'll even get a wire shoved in there, or a socket for that matter. If you look from the underside, we're like maybe 3/8 of an inch away from that header tube. So these things are NFG. Set of Speed Engineering long tubes are on order. Getting ready to stab the trans onto the motor here. I stuck some different valve covers I had laying around on here so we don't smudge up them white ones while we're working on it. We just got a Luke factory replacement clutch and flywheel for this. The LS3 flavor. They hold quite a bit of power, so be plenty adequate for what we're doing here. And put the new slave cylinder on there. And I see we're missing the dowel pin here. We'll have to try and find one of them around here somewhere. Ready to shove her in here. Looks like I got about 4 feet from the center of the motor mounts to the front of the car here. Typical F-body problems. 3 foot of space here in the cherry picker, so I built this extension and I put a motor in a 4th gen F-body, and you really got to reach to get them in there. So this tube's probably yay long, so we'll just stretch her out. Try not to flip her over. A little bit sketch with that cherry picker stretched out that far, but we got her set in there. Looking good everywhere clearance wise. I got the motor mounts in the stock position, but we'll have to wait till we get our long tube headers here. Those will ultimately dictate where this engine's going to land. Look inside the car, what we got going on here. See how much I had to bring that trans up to the floor to get somewhat of an acceptable driveline angle there for our drive shaft. Now we'll have to do some sort of we'll build a cover of some sort for that. But the shifter here, I was trying to figure out why this thing's so long. It seemed like the shifter is over 1 foot behind the transmission. Well, Shane was here a little while ago and informed me that when he got the tranny from the salvage yard, they didn't have a shifter for it, so they went and grabbed him a shifter. Well, they got one off of a V6 car. Normally these arms would only be about, I don't know, yay long. The shifter would be way up here. That would probably work in this situation and put us right where we want to be. I've got a bullseye crosshairs underneath there, you see in the Sharpie marker. But it doesn't really make any sense to go buy a different shifter or aftermarket shifter that we don't know is going to work for sure, and we might end up cutting and modifying anyways. So we're going to hack this sucker apart and make it work. So I figured just cut these arms off and cut out what I need and TIG weld it back together, but that's going to be near impossible to TIG weld with all this sound deadening crap on here, and it's all packed down in them holes. It's going to be pretty much impossible to TIG weld, so we'll have to come up with something different for that, I guess. Well, that might work. Wire wheeled that crap off the best I could, and it just smeared all over. I hit her with the little propane torch, and she's mighty hot yet. But burned all that shit out of there. And I think now if I disassemble the shifter and toss her in the old blast cabinet, might be clean enough to weld. Well, that wasn't very much fun, but I got that aluminum welded. Ended up taking like 5 inches out of this arm and then tipping these straight up and welding to the side of them things to get our height back so we got clearance underneath the floor here. Cut like 5 inches out of this, and I had to take about 3 inches off the linkage rod there. But I think she'll work. Oh yeah, that position's like perfect. Working on getting this transmission mounted up. I've got a mount built here, and I've got bolts countersunk into the top there with a regular poly mount. And as you can see, these bolts are kind of offset from one another. That's because these TR6060s are mounted from the side instead of the bottom, and they make a mount adapter through the aftermarket for these, but it puts it down like another inch, and in order to retain this factory cross member, I had to shove her up a little higher. I better buy a freaking lottery ticket. That's 2 swaps back to back now that I didn't have to cut the drive shaft on. This one's out of a 04 Ford Explorer, and it's got a slip in the center because these trannies have a fixed rear yoke, so you got to have a slip on the drive shaft somewhere. This is a billet flange adapter. There's a bunch of companies that make them, and I had to buy this flange yoke as well. Stock cross member up in there. Moved it back probably, about 6 inches here. The frame dips down right here, kind of a little pocket. I'm gonna have to shim it up when I do finally re-drill these holes. I'm not gonna do that until I got the headers in. I might have to move a little bit. Got us another pile of parts. Long tubes are in. Fitting pretty awesome. Had to put the tiniest little ding right there at the back of that control arm mount. Just heated her up with the torch and laid a piece of 1-inch tube on there and gave her a whack. But now we got clearance. The intake bolted on there finally, and a 98-02 LS1 Camaro water pump. You got to run them spacers on there to get the belt line back up where it belongs. And they've got a 1/8-inch pipe tapped hole in there ready for you, so you can plumb your steam line directly into that. The hoses are for the same car, 98-02 Camaro. They're landing right where they need to go, but this radiator's got an 1.5-inch outlet here, and these tubes are 1.25 inches, so I'm gonna have to lop both them spigots off and weld new ones on. Yeah, we'll just re-weld them spigots on there. That way we don't have to hack and try to adapt these hoses 2 different sizes. Be a lot cleaner installation. Also got the pressure line on the power steering dialed together here. I don't know what this hose is from. I assume it's off of the donor truck, but it's definitely not off of this car because these LS use the O-ring style fitting, and this car has a standard flare in the box. So I simply just cut that end of the hose off and reflared it for the nut, and that's a funky nut too on the pressure line. So if you're doing one of these, don't discard that nut. Normally they give me the line that came off the car and I have to adapt it to the LS pump. In that case, one of these fittings come in handy. Takes it from that O-ring style fitting to standard brake line flare. This company makes them, and Dirty Dingo makes them as well. Well, after 3 days in a row of buying the wrong belt for this car, I finally got one that would fit my daily trips to town for parts. I would just grab a different size one and try it and go bigger or smaller until I got her the right size. We're running a throttle body upside down because with it flipped around the other way, the stock truck cable wouldn't have made it into the car without running sideways across the intake, and wouldn't have looked very nice. Also had to re-drill these stanchions for the fuel rail hold down. You see there's another set of holes there because we switched over to these EV6 54-pound injectors. He's going to cam this motor eventually. That was a set that I had old Street Car Injection clean and flow for me earlier this year. Check him out. I'll throw a picture up of the stock injectors. We were going to put those in there, but as you can see, that wasn't an option. They're toast. This throttle cable bracket, I just took the stock truck one and lopped it off and welded some steel on there and grabbed this hole and that hole and braced her up good. TIG welded her up. Figured I'd show you that before I painted it so you can actually see it. It doesn't blend in with all this black. Damn! Would you look at that 3-inch exhaust? I ended up welding a pair of V-band flanges here on the collectors, and that's going into a Pipes brand 409 stainless X pipe. This particular one was made to fit up into that tunnel a little bit. Gained a couple inches of ground clearance. Just TIG welded all this out. Turned out pretty nice. I did have to add some offsets here. I had some 409 stainless bends on hand, or else the mufflers would have been hitting the rear end yoke. Those mufflers are a set of Spintech 6000 series, and I used some stainless band clamps on each side of them. That way we got the flexibility to change them out if we don't like them. Don't have to cut welds and all that jazz. And from there, we got a pair of Flowmaster 3-inch mandrel bent tailpipes. So we got some lumber and some shims holding them in place for the time being. Working on getting her mounted up. These tailpipes are actually made for first-gen Camaro, but in reading some reviews online, somebody said they put them on a second-gen and they fit awesome. And I'm going to have to agree with them. I always liked this quarter dump exit. So we'll get her mounted up. Got the fuel tank out of the car. Had to remove this tiny little 1/4-inch return line. The feed used to run over here too, over to the frame. But I shortened that up and added this 5/16 return line in here. That's soldered into where this little one was, and it goes all the way to the bottom so we don't aerate the fuel on the return side. Get her put back up in there and get started on the fuel system. Well, before I go whole hog on the fuel system here, figured I'd better get the wiring harness and stuff plugged in because that fuel lines are going to have to run over the top of some of this wiring harness. I got that all tucked in nice and got most of the wires stashed up underneath the intake manifold. Here's a little before shot of what these coil packs are looking like. Pretty grimy and crusty looking. And there's the after. I pulled all the coils off the bracket and sandblasted that and painted it and scrubbed and scraped. I got about 2 hours into this one side of the coil packs. But it's the little things like that that'll make your build stand out from the rest of them. A little bit of attention to detail, tucking the wires. I could have plugged this wiring harness in about 5 minutes, but I probably took an hour and a half routing it, changing it, just getting it to lay where it looks decent. So the devil's in the details, boys. Also through the ECM in the blast cabinet. This thing was freaking nasty. It looked like it came off the bottom of the ocean, but not looking too bad now. Oops, got a little run in there. We better wet sand and buff that, huh? Just kidding. We finally did it. We hit 1,000 subscribers. Thank you. It's time for a celebration. I got that ECM mounted up there on the firewall, as well as the fuse box. Harness, there's hardly any extra there, it just kind of loops and goes right back into the ECM. The gauge wiring and stuff is going through the firewall behind the ECM there through a grommet. I didn't mention it, but you should probably guess from seeing this here that this thing's getting cruise control. So got the cruise control mounted there. That bundle of red wire is for my switched ignition I need to hook up yet. And the fuse box is right there behind that fuel line. We've got a return style regulator, and we've got the fuel system completely plumbed in this thing. Really the only thing left to do before we can fire this thing is get the radiator back in. We're going to modify that because we need to hook transmission lines up or else it's going to yak all over the floor when we start it. So let's get that radiator modified. Well, we gave that the old whack-a-wheezy with the Sawzall. And I've got some of the proper size tubing here needs to go back in there. We're gonna jump over to the bead roller there and roll some beads on this tubing here. I'm just using my smallest beading die here and just a bolt and the largest washer I had laying around that would fit inside that tubing, so I can get it in there. So limited to, this is about as small as I can bead roll on a tube on my machine here. Should work. Come on, baby. There you have it. I reckon that'll work nicely. I left that weld on there so I got some meat to weld to. And I put that second bead on there so it doesn't fall down in there on me and makes up the gap. This first one I cut, I'd have to fill a huge gap all the way around, so let's weld her up. Well, it isn't going to win me any awards, but it's welded. Do her again on the other side. That radiator finished up, put back in, and got some transmission lines hooked up here. Not looking too awful bad. I put a union there, kind of up underneath the cross member, because there's no way that was going in one piece. And since we got her up in there, I'll show you the rest of the fuel system here. This is our braided fuel line going up to the rail, quick connect into high pressure filter, and then poly line from there back. This is our 5/16 return line that's going right to the regulator. And I'm clipped into all the factory locations here for the fuel line. It's all tucked up in tight fairly nicely. And then there's our Walbro 255 inline fuel pump, and the fuel pump wire goes down inside the car. I ran that wire down through the channel in the kick plate, so it comes through the firewall with the rest of the wires. These 255 Walbros need some sort of inlet screen. If you've got a good sock in the tank, that'll do it, but this one didn't have one. And then there's our 5/16 return line clipped in there. Well, that's a bummer. I just keyed her up to try to get fuel pressure adjusted here, and she's just spraying gas out of the inlet on the regulator here, and yeah, that fitting is NFG. I'll have to replace that. Alright, we got our leaks fixed. Back to trying to adjust fuel pressure here. You either keep keying on and off here to make the fuel pump run, or we can hook up through HP tuners here for connected and run the fuel pump steady state. Fuel pump on. I can crank this baby up. Right about there. Hey Bruce, you ready to start this sumbitch up or what? We got her hot wired with some gator clips, just that one wire going to the relay, and I hooked up this yellow wire lone wolf style to the starter. See if we can hear this thing run. We'll get the scanner going. Pressure. It's tapping a little bit, but that should shut up momentarily here. Get a little oil in them lifters. Oh, better get that off the header. Oh, get them lifters to pump up a little bit. There we go. Saw a drip right here. That valve train quieted right down. Always something. Just topped off the power steering, and I sandblasted that reservoir before we put it together here, and there's a pinhole on the side of it up here. Conveniently, it doesn't look like it can pull this pulley off without hitting that, so guess we're ripping the whole works off again. Way she goes. Well, there it is. Well, Mike brought us over a new power steering pump. We got that put back on there. And got the intake tube done. We're running this speed density, so no mass air. The IAT sensors tapped into the boot there. And we also got the clutch master set up in. This is McLeod setup. Comes with a Willwood master and a little adapter and a plate that sandwiches between the booster there, so I had to pull the booster off and had to do some grinding and clearancing to make that fit. Wasn't exactly a straightforward install, but it's in and we've got a working clutch. Putting a few more finishing touches on her. Just got the trans tunnel patch back in. Just built me a box that tapers down there. I'm like a ½ inch over the top of the tranny back there and just over top of the shift linkage here. That's flanged around the edge. I wish I would have shown you before I put all that sound deadener on there, but there's a 1-inch flange all the way around it that's screwed in, because this needs to come off to take the shifter off in order to take the trans back out. But where the shift rod goes through there, I used some of this thick foam. I just punched a hole in it so the rod could pass through. Well, not very exciting, but I think it's worth mentioning. These aftermarket cruise control levers. This is the one where you cut it off and it set screws on, and I pulled the column apart and ran the wire down through. But these function, the switches function backwards from what the LS cruise control module wants. Drive-by-wire or drive-by-cable. So you've got to add a couple relays in here. 5-pin relay to reverse the function. Instead of being a normally closed switch, turns it to normally opened. But yeah, got the relays here. Got her all wired up. They're making clicky noises when I push the buttons, so everything should work. We'll get this stuff tied up and maybe go for a cruise, huh? Well, here we go. Ugh. I got like 2 miles to go down this muck. I think we're gonna take a rain check on the test drive till she comes back for a retune. When the world dries out a little bit here. What do you think, Bruce? Liking the sun today? Eh? Well, since we aborted our test drive, got her all sewed up ready. Letting her run out here. Fan cycled a couple times. That's all doing what it's supposed to be doing. I guess I never did show the relay and stuff. Use the Volvo fan relay. Get it on the last project and the one before. Pretty handy little things. But the tentative plan on this is he's gonna buy some aftermarket gauges for me to install. Intellitronics has got a new set coming out. I think he's kind of waiting for them to drop to see what those look like, or else New Vintage has a pretty nice setup too. And that's when she'll come back to get air, fuel, and spark tuned. We couldn't finish her off without hearing them spin techs bark first. Thanks again to all my subscribers, past, present, and future. We'll see you on the next project.